At a little earlier show tonight, I wanted to talk a little bit before we leave about resourcing for our academy training segment. So, which is kind of funny because we did talk a little bit about that. And I don't have if you're getting the very first version of this or the audio version, I apologize, but like sometimes our visuals come with a show and sometimes they don't. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how should I resource, what should I resource, when should I resource, and kind of go through that for our academy training segment this evening. Welcome to our academy training segment. Tonight we're going to be talking about resourcing, why Alex loves to resource and smuggle only cards. But I thought it would be fun to kind of just have it doesn't have to be a long conversation, but I think that's like, as a newer player, when they come into it, you always wonder, what should I do? And now that we have smuggle, and I'll pick on my nephew just a little bit, just because, I mean, he's only 13. So, he has a lot of learning to do. He hasn't played as many TCGs as some of the other folks that we play around. And I think one of the big things for him that he was kind of talking to me about is he doesn't know when to resource or what to resource. And I know there's a million different play lines, but on a general basis, I think on an overall, in general understanding, we could talk about turn 0, maybe your turns 1 through 3. We could talk a little bit about, your in-game type resourcing, and we could talk about smuggling. So I thought that would be kind of a fun thing. I thought it would be fun to talk about. So, Alex, I'm going to step off my soapbox for a second. I'm going to ask you what in general, on a general high level for resourcing, what are you considering doing when you go to resource?
Ooh, never resource, never surrender.
Oh, so you just run on 2 resources the whole game. Got it.
Try to, right. Yeah, like that Kylo deck. No, so, oh man, there's a lot. So, man, I guess the easiest way to start and the easiest thing is when you first draw your hand, if you don't have a playable first turn thing, you should probably throw it back and then redraw it, mulligan it. I think that's a very easy, very straightforward step. But depending on what else you have, like for the first turn, part of it is knowledge of the other leaders. Part of it is knowledge of your own deck. If your opponent's playing something like Sabine or Kylo, you probably don't need your 7, 8, 9 costing resource card or costing cards in your hand. You should probably resource those because the game might not even last that long. So that's a very easy, straightforward process. Does it work every single time? No. Sometimes you need a Rival's Fall if your deck doesn't have a lot of control and they're playing a Gar-Saxon deck that Voltron's a whole bunch of upgrades together and you don't really have ways of stopping it. Also, if you have 3 copies of a card in your deck, it's much easier for you to resource something than a 1-off or a 2-off in a deck, which is part of the consistency. That's why you play 3 cards over 1. JJ not here to defend himself. Easy. And a lot of it is just do I have a turn 1 and a turn 2 play? That's kind of what your bare minimum of what you're going for, right? So if you're playing a blue villain deck and you're just cool, I have a Pike Sentinel and the Client, I should be okay. The first turns, even if I brick hard and don't get anything, I still have passable plays. It gets a little bit trickier with Smuggle because you're cool, Smuggle, throw into resources automatically, but sometimes that's not always the best option. Hondo, if you have a collection Starfighter, it costs 2. It smuggles out for 3. It's fantastic. You give something an experience, but if you don't have another card to play, you still want just to play the 2/2 drop and not smuggle it out, so you still have board presence in some way. A timely intervention is fantastic, but if you want to use it for a reinforcement walker, right, you want it in hand because it's 9 resources as opposed to 10. I mean, it's probably a little bit of a obscure example, but like, timely intervention, if you don't have ECL or you don't want to use ECL, Poe costs 6 with timely intervention to ECL out as opposed to 7 for smuggling it out, which might just be a little bit too high, be suboptimal. So the things with smuggle might not always be auto resource, but man, do things with smuggle really bail you out on your resource choices. Like, when you're playing like Kira. I know you do that, Tanner. It's like, cool, first light comes out on 7 regardless.
Yep.
Do I want to, it might be bad for me in the future to do 4 damage to my own guy, but I'm just going to put in the resources because it costs exactly as much. We'll deal with that later. That's a problem for later. Alex turns, and that's like if you're having a real hard choice with what you want to resource. There's also cards like resupply or super laser tech, right? So you ramp, and that affects the curve that you have in your deck for resourcing. It's kind of a judgment call if you're like, cool, I have resupply. Maybe like when I was playing old Han Green, right? If I have resupply in my hand, that means I can take out Han 2 turns early, right, and play a 7 drop on like turn 3, which is pretty rough for my opponent to deal with. Turn 4 Han is kind of silly. So you always have to keep that in consideration, but if you're going against something like an aggro deck, you probably don't need to ramp, you probably need to control the board more. So like putting resupply in the resources should be, it's not a wasted opportunity cost that way.
Yeah. And I think that's like one of the big things is understanding your opportunity cost. There you go. That's a really good term, and that's actually probably like maybe that's what the name of the episode should have been. It's opportunity costing for that, and I think that's like if I don't know. The problem is Alex and I both play control style decks, so you are going to get a little bit more control focused discussion than you would like a super aggro discussion, but. We talked a little bit about like Kylo Yellow earlier, and when you want to talk about resourcing, turn 1, I know you can drop that blaster for 1 cost, but man, on the next turn or the turn after to do that extra 2 damage to push it through as an aggro deck, like that's worth sometimes that extra resources. So understanding what that opportunity cost is, like you said, the first light, and I know I like how you picked that as an example because first light is a big combo, especially if you have a reinforcement walker out in a later game Kira game. If I have my reinforcement walker out and it hasn't swung yet and you can't kill it, I could pull my first light up, drop 4 damage on it, and now guess what? That thing is swinging for 10. If you don't kill that thing, I mean, like, I'm going to heal and I'm going to do 10 damage, and maybe I'll happen to draw Overwhelming Barrage or something cool to put in my hand, and I don't need to heal. But I'm, like, it can be a really dirty play. And I think like understanding that opportunity cost for your resources is huge because a like a Lom Pike costs 5 to smuggle out. Is it as good as ECLing that stupid thing out? Absolutely not. Is it definitely a really good play if you have a maul? Let's say you have a maul, you have a ramp in your hand. Like, do you really want to resource your ramp because you really kind of want to ramp against this deck? Like, that's understanding that opportunity cost is like I'm gonna put Forlon down there because so's life, right? Like, yeah, I can't ECL this out anymore, but I'll tell you what, I sure as heck don't want to get rid of my maul unless it's like turn 1 because I want that maul and I can't get that maul back, but I could get a Forlon back or a Lom Pike, I guess, not a Forlon. Sorry, you can't get. I don't think Forlon has smuggle on him.
No, not unless you're off aspect teching it.
Yeah. That would be crazy cost, right? That'd be what, a 6? That'd be an 8 cost. And if you're not, it'd be an 8 cost for ambush. That's not even worth it.
Yeah. So the real hard part about this is, man, I have like 5 resources. I have a 5 drop that like can kind of do something, or I have a 2 drop and a 3 drop, and like trying to decide which one is better. If I have 5 resources, do I want to drop like Gideon Ask? Man, these villainy things are easy. Okay, no. Do I want to
A
drop
Poe.
a Poe? Yeah. I have 5 cards and 5 resources. Do I drop a Poe? I don't have like ECL or ambush or anything to make immediate use of them, or do I do something like drop a Sabine and like a Sindari Peacekeeper or something, right? And again, that kind of goes into knowing matchups. If you're, but a lot of it's just like, man, half the time just dropping more units it might be the way to go, and then like figuring it out later. It's more things that your opponent has to deal with, and the more things your opponent has to deal with, the more they have the opportunity to mess things up. And like that was a huge thing in X-Wing, right? It's just like just give your opponent all the options, because if they don't make the right one, everything's fine.
Yep. Well, and that's especially why do you think I like to play Swarm? I like to play the Swarms because it's like which one do you want to shoot at? Now that's back in the day when we could put 8 like cool ships on the board and it was like actually viable to run a droid swarm. But that was the same thing as like when you only had 3 units, or okay, they're not units. When you had 3 ships on the board and like 2 of them were in your arc, it is a little bit easier to make that call of which who are you going to shoot at? Who can you do the most damage to? Who's going to like Yoda used to, not Yoda, Anakin can like, has 3 force, an evade and a focus token. And you could just like get rid of all this damage from your opponent's dice. And then Anakin lives and it only has 3 health. So you would think, no way in hell is this thing going to live. And sure enough, it lives. And you just regret your whole life after you shoot at it twice. And it still lives. In this game, it's kind of the same thing. Like, you're right. Like, do you play like if you're at your mid game, right? And I guess kind of transitioning to mid game, do you have a stable board? That's the biggest question. Do you have a stable board? If you have a stable board, playing a Poe is probably not the end of the world, right? But if you don't have a stable board, that's the only thing you're going to drop, and it doesn't have any interaction because you don't have timely intervention or ECL or anything. You just drop it. But if they play a Power of the Dark Side, there goes your Poe, right? And I guess again we're talking villain control. But, or let's say they ECL out their Poe into yours, like they could trade for you, or they have 1 more resource ahead and they're dropping an Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then now you're sitting here going, well, that Poe next turn is only going to be able to do so much. And so understanding where your board state is, like, do you need to push damage versus do you need to control them? Do you know where, what lanes they're going to come into next? Because if they're flying all space, you could drop a Poe all you want. It might not. If you're not ahead in the damage race, you might need that Razor Crest or that Concord Dawn Interceptor, which is really good. Concord Dawn Interceptor is just
they're disgusting. They should be in every blue hero deck. Period.
Yeah. Yeah, like I like them even better than the Disabling Fang Fighter. But again, like understanding your mid range, and I guess let's go back to like aggro a little bit, right? Like if you're playing and Sabine doesn't have a lot on the board, and she's got 4 resources, and it's her flip turn, what's the probability she's going to play a Fleet Lieutenant, a Wing Leader, or a Darksaber on herself? Probably pretty high. So you got to think about that, like going into that, like has she played a lot of units? Does she have a lot of stuff that like you have to play around? Because if she has an A-Wing up and she drops a Fleet Lieutenant, it's just going to ambush in, right? It's just going to come in for 5 damage, yada, yada, yada. But that's not always the line of play. So you got to understand where they want to be and how to tech against that, I guess, and without playing tech. Like you should play tech because tech's amazing, but not for this. In this scenario, tech is probably a card I resource right away.
He does have Smuggle too,
Yes,
for what it's worth.
He does.
That particular one.
And he's worth a Smuggle cost in the late game. Like because again, like it's the same thing. If you have 3 resources and you have 1 unit on the board and you can't protect tech, you drop tech, somebody's going to try to kill that thing. They're not going to let, if they're good, they're not going to let your tech live. They're not going to let you smuggle out crazy stuff that you should not be able to get out at all. Though I have never seen anybody tech a Crate Dragon ever.
I have played against someone who teched in a Redemption. for
All
10.
right. Well, I mean,
So that's close.
that's pretty close.
It
That's
didn't
one
do
resource shop.
anything, so I didn't care. So I'm just like, whatever. I have a Devastator, but you know
Yeah.
that's just a me thing, right? So
That's because we play Pelp all the time, and we know as soon as you bring out that Devastator, we're just waiting, and I'm going to Pelp it and take or not your Devastator, your redemption. I'll just wait, and I'll just take your redemption when you decide to play that out. I guess by 10 resources, unless I've ramped it. Well, I probably have ramped it to 10 resources by the time you can afford to play that. At that point, I probably don't need it, but
yeah. So like, if you're in mid game, the real like skill is just like, do I want to drop my high cost unit or do I want to drop like 2 lower cost units? Man, if any of them has Sentinel, that's usually the way to go. Then you can play your high costed unit next turn. But also, like, I think that's like why like Blue Han or just Blue Red Han is solid, right? Because you have so many more options about what you want to drop. You're just like, oh, I'm at 3 resources. I've got K2 SO in my hand. He's a very good drop. I'll just give him the 2 damage, whatever. Like, he has a benefit if he dies, kind of thing. As opposed to just like, well, I have 3. Do I drop Yoda or do I drop K2 SO? A lot of that's just like, wow, are they aggro? Then I should probably drop my Yoda so I get a little bit more restore. Or, oh man, are they control? Well, I'll K2SO and either start trying to burn their base down faster or just rip a card from their hand. So that's the decisions that are the most interesting ones. Because late game, you're just like, whatever, I'm just going to resource my super laser tech that I drew late game, like your lower costed units. Like, I don't need my Inferno 4 anymore. I'll just, keep the reinforcement walker in my hand or whatever, So I think late game, also like, man, there's a lot of times where I'm just like, cool, I have like 3 Avengers in this deck, right? And that goes up to 9. And I'm just sitting at 8 resources and I didn't draw my Avenger in my hand. Well, then I'm going to keep both my cards. Like, there's no reason for me to continue building up my resources unless there's a very specific thing, like you need Smuggle or like you need a 4 and a 5 drop immediately this turn. So like, there's a lot of times where it's just like, unless you have the highest costing card in your deck, you probably don't need to resource late game. Sometimes you do if you're just like, oh boy, I have super laser blast and also like a sentinel that I need to drop that turn, but that's like super few and far between.
yeah, and I think that's the thing is like when everybody pillages your hand early, by the time you get to late game, like you have to make decisions on what you're gonna resource if people are stripping your hand. And I guess we're picking on pillage because we talked about that earlier in the episode. If you want to go back and check out our full episode, but the big thing is and I ran into this today while running Jabba. Like, I had a Maul and a Rancor and a and a super laser tech, and I was at 6 resources, and I want to put something down, and it's like, but do you put the Rancor down and then be able to play your super laser tech and that's it for the round? Like, so if you only have a few cards, especially when you're in your late game, you have to understand, like, is the resource 100% necessary? If it is, which is going to make the bigger impact? And like, for example, in that situation, if they had like a full health unit on the other side of the board, me playing a Rancor is okay if I want to capture something, but like Maul just comes in and takes it off the board. Maul just says, see you have a nice life. I'm going to do 7 damage to you. And their unit's gone. And it's really disgusting if you have Jabba out, because then you just dump the damage on Jabba, and then Jabba doesn't give a shit. But that's now we're getting deck specific. But you know what I mean. Like, late game, I resource the super laser tech because even though it would have been nice to be able to get to 8 resources faster, so that I could get a crate dragon out possibly the turn later, I don't have it in my hand, so I can't guarantee it. Tech lets you play that, but who's going to let you keep a tech on the board in the late game? Very few people, I hope. Like, I don't know. I if I see a tech come down late game, my goal is to get rid of your tech instantaneously. Like, unless I can kill your base. But
I just drop a relentless and everything's fine. We're good.
yeah, okay, that's fine too.
They can't smuggle out. I mean, they can smuggle out that rival's fall, but it ain't gonna do anything.
Yeah. Or maybe we'll start putting force lightning and everything, right? And oh, you have a tech. Oh no, your tech has no text now. Sorry.
No, I have force lightning in a couple of my red decks.
But anyway, going back to the understanding when you need to drop that card versus when you don't, and like if your game is on the line or you're losing, you have to go for the big play, whatever the big play is. You know.
Also, if you're looking at your hand, you're just like, cool, this is my path to lethal. Do that.
Yeah.
Like, take a second to just be like, hey, can I actually like kill win the game this turn? Like if you have like armed to the teeth or something, right? So if I put it on this unit over here, swing in for the 2 extra and then give something else a 2 extra, does that win me the game? If not, can I take initiative and I win immediately the turn later? Like you always have to be mindful for like just paths to victory. Right? Sometimes you're just like, cool, I have, for a cause I believe in, they're very low health on their base. I have 2 other copies of this in my deck. I'm just going to dump all 4 cards off the top of my deck that I drew
And search
or that I saw, so I can continue to try to get to more for a cause I believes in, because like they literally can't do anything about that unless they have like a relentless. But you lost that game if they have a relentless out anyway. So
yeah, and it's kind of like same way as when you play your 4 claws, if you look and you say, oh, there's a K2SO and a heroic sacrifice there, right? Like, and you only need so much damage. You could keep those and then play it the next turn, and it still triggers and does the 3 damage or discards the card, right? So like you can still do things to it that do weird, creepy things, and I think that's the bigger point is understanding where that is. If it's a smuggle card and you don't need that extra resource, just like when I get late game, I just dump it. Like that arm to the teeth. If I've got 8 resources out, I almost always just put that away right away and just use it as a smuggle card, because then I get to keep something I need as a tool to go against them. Especially if I have like a Rival's Fall in my hand or something else. And again, now I'm getting into like Red Kira and let's.
Yep, don't know. Mid-range games or tempo decks though. Those get kind of hard in terms of what you want to resource, because you're always trying to play on curve, right? Like that's the whole point of your deck, is that you're playing the best units when you can. And if they have like a control or an aggro deck, they start, you're not value trading at that point anymore. Then it becomes kind of a weird game of, do I resource this on curve card that would technically be better so I can play 2 units here, so I could actually like have a board, or continue playing like, well, I have no other units, but I can drop this Obi-Wan and that will kind of slow them down, but I get no benefit out of it. Or if you want to do like, well, I have 6 resources, I have this Obi-Wan, but I'd rather drop the Sindari Peacekeeper and like R2D2, whatever. Like you're not even using your full resources, but like at least I have some sort of board presence that I could build off of.
Exactly.
That's the fun things.
Yeah. So I think the last thing really to cover is just kind of smuggling, right? And we talked a little bit about it throughout the thing, and like the first question I always have is, do you have tech in your deck? Because smuggling becomes different if you have tech in your deck. And so like I want to kind of say, hey, let's pretend we don't have tech in the deck. Like, where does the smuggle cards actually get you? And we talked about, the value, right, and your opportunity cost. And I think understanding when you get into that smuggling, if you're having a hard time resourcing, put the smuggle cards in there at least to begin with, because you'll find out later when you want to play that and you go, oh, I have that in smuggle, but oh, it doesn't work. You'll know that's probably a card you don't want to smuggle. Cassian is a great example of that, because Cassian is a 3 cost, comes in untapped, right? But if you play him for 5, he comes in ready. So if you're playing an aggro deck, he's an okay 5 cost in an aggro deck, because he's doing 3 damage when he comes out versus having to wait a full churn for that. So he has the ability to sit there and also soak up damage. He's 5 health. Like he's a great. He could be a really good card to swing your game if you need that extra few damage.
Right, but conversely, it's like, cool, my opportunity cost of I can swing 3 damage now in for 5 resources as opposed to, well, you drop them for 3, and then on your turn you can swing in for 3 on 4 resources. Next turn, swing in for 3 more on the 5 resources where you normally get the benefit. And like that's the interesting thing to me is that you have to like determine which path would be better. If they have a lot of units, you might just want to just play him outright for 3 because he has a little bit higher health. He can actually take out some units. But if they don't, or like you can, do something really tricky, bringing him out for 5 and swinging in for 3 is pretty legit. Like I've won so many like pre-release games because I'm just like, oh, you claimed you have like 2-3 health left. Well, I'm just gonna smuggle out Cassian and win the game because no one's expecting that. Like,
Exactly.
so it's like really the skill comes into evaluating if he's worth playing for 3 resources and swinging in twice by the time you hit 5, or it's worth bringing him out for 5 and only swinging in for 1.
Yeah. And obviously, like this discussion kind of like this is not a Hondo discussion, right? Like Hondo's different. Like Hondo wants to smuggle. Like not all decks want that smuggle, and not all smuggle cards are amazing. There is some that are not super great. But it's kind of the same thing. Like that, what is it called? Covert, the one that heals you too.
Yeah, covert strength.
Thank you, covert strength. Like understanding on a smuggle side, is this worth? Like you probably don't need to. Like if you got this your opening hand, the rest of your hand is good. You probably just smuggle it, and it's just in there. It's just there for you in case you get into some deep crap, right? And it is kind of, I won't lie and tell you, it is kind of nice. I've actually used that a little bit more than I thought I would. And I actually was running it originally in my Han Blue deck, just because I could heal the damage, and then it gives that experience token to it. So, I mean, I won't lie and tell you that a Gay 2SO is a pretty fun K2SO if it lived long enough to be able to, heal damage to one round and then swing in a second time, the next round. So it's just understanding when is it better to play that. But smuggling is now a thing, and I don't know if we're going to see it go away. I hope we see more of it in the next set, but I don't know,
Yeah, one of the more like semi-relevant and actually a pretty difficult decision because I've been playing, Hondo so frequently. The pirate battle tank, like the 6 drop that you smuggle out for 7, the Sentinel 4/6, like that's a hard decision. What you want to do? Do you think you can push off like enough damage to smuggle it out next turn and give it the experience with Hondo, or like, no, I think I'm just going to put on, like, just going to put the pirate tank out and now just absorb a bunch of damage, and I lose the opportunity cost of giving it out, an experience token, and like that's very relevant for Hondo because a lot of things happen when you have 6 resources and there's a lot of damage going out. So if you it's really like, do I have a better thing I can play for 6 resources? No, well, I'm just gonna play the tank. I don't need to smuggle it out for the extra experience. Or like, oh man, they're hitting me really hard, or I want to protect Hondo himself because he comes out on 6 resources. So I'd rather just play the tank, and sucks that I missed out on one experience, but it is what it is, kind of thing. So that's a relevant thing too. I think it gets really interesting when like the smuggle costs are so close together.
Yeah. Or First Light, where it's dealing damage to something else, but again gives grit to it. So it's just like, I don't know, like I personally think people are sleeping on First Light in Kira decks, but that's just my opinion. I just think that card in the Kira deck like works really. I don't think it works in every deck, but
No. Hey, remember that First Light is a Underworld card, and you can just do damage to it when you swing in with Maul.
Yep.
Don't forget that. That's really nice. It's got 7 health.
Yep. And you want to know what you can do too with First Light? You could play your Maul, and then you have Maul out, right? You don't have to trigger ambush if you don't need to. Then you play your First Light, do damage back, and then you can swing with Maul and you can do the 4 damage to the ball. Then swing with Maul, who gets grit now, so now he's got overwhelm with like 11 damage, and then you can just deal the damage back to First Light, which is on the other side of the board. And then next turn that thing can then swing in again too. So it's like, I don't know. I'm happy. Some of me, I'm a little happier that I think the Smuggle is making some of these specific ambush cards and things like that. They're changing, like what we were calling opportunity cost. They're changing some of that in the spectrum for that. Like they're challenging, like, is Luke really that good? Yes. Okay. Well, then we probably still play Luke, right? Is Vader still really that good? Well, maybe not quite as good because we have some of these other options for things. And so I think that's, like that helps lower the cost of the cards financially for people who have to buy them, who don't, walk into cases. And then it also allows us to have a different dynamic inside of that game. And that's hence why I wanted to do a segment on resourcing, because I think it's very imperative to the game. And I think if you take one thing from our podcast, we like to talk about how to get you into the game, how to get you, some of the weird techniques. Obviously, we're not like top players. None of us like took down 5Ks or anything, but we're here to help you to say, hey, maybe you can learn a little bit. And resourcing is one of those. I think that like we had this, didn't have this issue in Destiny. In Destiny, you had little resource tokens, so you didn't have the same issue that we have here. With having to resource cards. And I think that opportunity cost, like we had talked about, it makes this game a lot more fun, because it's forcing you to make decisions that are harder than you have to in other TCGs. Yeah. Anything else you got on resourcing, buddy?
No, I mean, if anyone, I guess, wants to like send us a message with any other questions about like things for Smuggle, we can give back some opinions. But I mean, it's mostly just, I think we covered a huge aspect of it.
Yeah.
But it's all about opportunity cost and trying to analyze that. Or just YOLO everything like I do and just be like, yeah, we'll figure it out. That's a problem for future, Alex.
Yeah.
Just draw the overwhelming barrage to bail you out. It's easy.
Well, I won't lie and tell you that like sometimes you have that overwhelming barrage in your opening hand, and you mulligan, and then you end up with two of them, and you're like, well, one of those is probably getting resource, because I don't want to hold two of them in my hand.
Here's a weird secret. I almost always like resource overwhelming barrage. I usually just have the board locked out well enough that I don't actually need it, by and large.
Yeah. Which that works too. The overwhelming barrage is like a win more some condition sometimes, but well, all right. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. It was a